The wind howled across the prairie, a mournful lament that seemed to echo the emptiness in Silas's heart. It had been years since the fever had claimed his wife and son, leaving him with a ranch, a dog named Buster, and a silence so profound it pressed in on him like the vast, uncaring sky. He was a man carved from granite, his face a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles, his eyes holding the perpetual squint of someone always scanning the horizon for trouble. Buster, a scruffy mutt with more loyalty in his wagging tail than most men had in their souls, was his only constant companion. Today, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of a storm. Silas was checking the fences on the western edge of his sprawling yet desolate ranch. The land was harsh, unforgiving, but it was his. He preferred its honest brutality to the fickle nature of men. Buster, ever alert, trotted ahead, his nose twitching, his ears perked. Suddenly the dog let out a low growl, a sound Silas rarely heard unless a coyote got too close. "What is it, boy?" Silas murmured, his hand instinctively going to the worn Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. Buster didn't bark, but he moved with a purpose Silas recognized, a mix of curiosity and alarm. He led Silas towards the old abandoned barn, a relic from a previous failed homestead. It stood lopsided, its paint peeling, a silhouette against the darkening sky. As they approached, Buster's growls intensified, directed at the barn door. Silas cautiously pushed it open. The interior was dim, filled with the musty smell of hay and decay. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the cracks in the wooden walls. Then Silas saw it, scratched crudely, yet with a desperate urgency, into the thick layer of dust on the back wall of the barn, were 3 letters, SOS. Silas blinked, his weathered mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. This wasn't some child's idle drawing. The lines were deep, gouged by something sharp, something that spoke of raw fear. Buster whined softly, nudging Silas's leg. A knot of unease tightened in Silas's gut. Who would scratch such a message here, in the middle of nowhere? And more importantly, where were they now? He moved closer, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the floor. The scratching was erratic, almost frantic. Underneath the SOS, faint but discernible, were more marks, a jumble of lines that looked like a desperate attempt to convey something more. Silas's gaze swept the barn. It was empty, save for a few cobweb-laden tools and scattered remnants of hay. Yet the message on the wall screamed of presence, of a desperate need for help. A chill, unrelated to the approaching storm, snaked down Silas's spine. He felt a prickle of responsibility, a faint stirring of something long dormant within him. The message was a cry in the wilderness, and it had been heard. He looked at Buster, who was now sniffing intently at the base of the wall, his tail giving a hesitant thump. Silas knew with a certainty that surprised him that this was no ordinary discovery. It was the beginning of something he couldn't ignore. The storm broke with a fury that shook the very foundations of Silas's small cabin. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder roared like a wounded beast. Silas, hunched by the meager fire, found his thoughts returning, again and again, to the barn and the desperate SOS. He'd searched the immediate surroundings before the storm hit, finding nothing but churned mud and the tracks of wild animals. He tried to dismiss it, perhaps some drifter playing a cruel joke, but the raw fear etched into those scratches. It felt too real. Buster, sensing Silas's disquiet, nudged his hand with a wet nose. "All right, boy," Silas sighed, pushing himself up. "Let's go take another look. Maybe the rain washed something up." Armed with lanterns, they ventured back out into the tempest. The wind whipped at Silas's oilskin coat, and the rain stung his face. The barn, silhouetted against the lightning flashes, looked even more forlorn. Inside, the dust was now damp, clinging to the walls, but the SOS remained starkly visible. Silas shone his lantern over the rest of the wall, his eyes tracing the faint, desperate lines beneath. He realized they weren't random. They were attempts at forming words, letters, almost like a child trying to write. Then Buster whined, a soft, questioning sound, and nudged Silas towards a pile of old sacks in the far corner. Silas moved the sacks, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and a strange, growing hope. And there, huddled in the shadows, was a small, frail figure, a girl. She was impossibly thin, her clothes ragged and torn, her face smudged with dirt. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the lantern light, held a raw terror that mirrored the desperation of the message on the wall. She flinched as Silas approached, a silent, almost involuntary movement. "Hey there," Silas said, his voice rougher than he intended, trying to soften it. "It's okay. We're not gonna hurt you." The girl didn't respond, her gaze fixed on him, wary and afraid. Buster, surprisingly, didn't growl. He whined again, a soft, comforting sound, and sat down a few feet away, watching the girl with a gentle intensity. Silas knelt down, keeping a respectful distance. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Slowly, tentatively, the girl shook her head. Her lips were cracked, and Silas noticed a faint tremor running through her small body. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm's roar. "My name is Silas. This is Buster," he said, gesturing to the dog, who offered a small, encouraging tail wag. "We found your message. Are you alone?" Another hesitant nod. Tears welled in her eyes, tracing clean paths through the dirt on her cheeks. They took my pa and ma," she choked out. "Left me. I hid. I'm Lily." Silas felt a familiar ache, a phantom limb of pain, stir within him. He saw echoes of his own loss in her wide, haunted eyes. He looked at the SOS again, then back at Lily. It wasn't a prank. It was a plea from a child abandoned to the elements. "You can't stay here, Lily," Silas said, his voice firm but gentle. "It's not safe. Come with me. We'll get you somewhere warm and dry." He held out a hand, calloused and rough. After a long, hesitant moment, Lily's small, trembling fingers reached out and grasped his. It was a touch so fragile, so full of unspoken fear, that it sent a jolt through Silas. As he helped her to her feet, guiding her out of the damp, cold barn and towards the distant, flickering light of his cabin, he knew his quiet, solitary life had just been irrevocably altered. Buster trotted faithfully by their side, a silent sentinel. Back in the cabin, the crackling fire offered a stark contrast to the raging storm outside and the icy fear that had gripped Lily. Silas busied himself, fetching dry blankets and a pot of stew he'd left simmering. He didn't ask many questions. Sensing the girl was too traumatized to recount her story all at once, he focused on the immediate needs: warmth, food, safety. He settled Lily by the fire, wrapping her in a thick wool blanket. Buster lay near her feet, a warm, comforting presence, occasionally nudging her hand with his nose. Lily, initially huddled and withdrawn, slowly began to relax under the quiet ministrations. She ate the stew ravenously, her small frame trembling with hunger. Silas watched her, a strange mix of protectiveness and unease churning within him. He wasn't used to company, especially not the company of a child. His life had been a carefully constructed fortress of solitude, designed to keep the pain of his past at bay. Now a fragile girl, a living embodiment of loss, had breached its walls. "Are your parents gone for good?" Silas asked, his voice low, after Lily had finished her meager meal. Lily nodded, her eyes clouding over. They were taken by men, rough men. They said something about a debt. Pa wouldn't pay. They came and took them. They told me to stay quiet or they'd take me too." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in the blanket. Silas's jaw tightened. He knew such men, raiders perhaps, or debtors collecting in the cruelest way. The frontier was rife with such desperation and violence. He remembered the emptiness that had followed his own family's demise, the way the world had seemed to tilt on its axis. He saw that same existential dread in Lily's young eyes. When did this happen?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. 2 days ago, she whispered, I hid in the barn. I was so scared. I didn't know what else to do. I saw the dust, and I remembered seeing something like that on a book. SOS. I scratched it. I hoped someone would see. Silas reached out and placed a hand on her small shoulder. It felt unnaturally light. You were brave, Lily, very brave. You did the right thing, and I'm glad Buster found you. He scratched Buster behind the ears and the dog thumped his tail. As the storm raged outside, a fragile calm settled within the cabin. Lily, exhausted and finally feeling safe, drifted off to sleep, her breathing evening out. Silas sat by the fire watching her, the silence no longer an enemy, but a shared space. He knew he couldn't keep her here forever. He needed to figure out what had happened, who these men were, and if there was anyone to contact for Lily. But for tonight, she was safe. And for the first time in a long time, Silas felt a purpose that wasn't solely about survival. It was about protection. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, the air crisp and smelling of damp earth and pine. Lily, rested and a little less terrified, emerged from the shadows of her ordeal. She moved about Silas's small cabin with a quiet curiosity, her eyes taking in the sparse furnishings. Silas, meanwhile, was wrestling with a decision. He wasn't equipped to raise a child. His life was one of self-reliance, of fending off the harsh realities of the frontier alone. Yet abandoning Lily felt like a betrayal of the very plea she had etched into the dust. "Lily," he began, his voice hesitant, as he prepared a simple breakfast of flapjacks and beans, "do you remember anything about the men who took your parents? What they looked like? Any names?" Lily chewed thoughtfully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "They wore dark clothes," she said slowly. "One of them had a scar on his cheek, like a jagged line, and he had a loud laugh. The other one was quiet, but he had mean eyes. They called the scarred one Jeb. Jeb. The name didn't ring an immediate bell, but scars and mean eyes were hardly uncommon among the rougher elements on the frontier. Silas knew he needed more information. He decided his first stop would be the nearest settlement, Harmony Creek, a small, dusty town about a day's ride away. It was a place he usually avoided, preferring his own company, but Lily's safety and the need to find out if her parents could be rescued necessitated the journey. "Lily," Silas said, sitting down opposite her, "I'm going into town to ask some questions, see if anyone knows anything about these men. You'll stay here, all right? It's safe. Buster will keep you company." Lily nodded, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. Will you be back soon?" "As soon as I can," Silas promised. He packed some supplies, a canteen of water, and his rifle. As he was about to saddle his horse, Buster let out a low growl, his gaze fixed on the dusty track leading away from the ranch. Silas followed Buster's line of sight. In the distance, barely visible, a lone rider was approaching. Silas felt a familiar tightening in his gut. Strangers were rarely good news out here, not unless they were lost or running from something. The rider was cloaked, his features obscured by the wide brim of his hat. He rode with a determined, almost aggressive pace. Silas watched him, his hand hovering near his colt. The rider reined in his horse a good distance from the cabin, dismounting with a fluid, practiced motion. He was a tall man, lean and wiry, with a grim set to his jaw. His eyes, when they met Silas's, were cold and appraising. He didn't offer a friendly greeting. "Silas Kane?" the stranger asked, his voice raspy. "Depends who's asking," Silas replied, his own voice as steady and unyielding as the rocks on his land. "Name's Jedediah Croft. I represent certain parties who believe you've taken something that doesn't belong to you." Croft's gaze flickered past Silas towards the cabin. "A young girl, perhaps?" Silas felt a surge of anger. This was too fast, too coincidental. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his hand now firmly on the butt of his colt. Buster let out a low growl, positioning himself between Silas and the stranger. Croft's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Don't play coy, Kane. We know she's here, and those who sent me want her back now." The quiet, solitary life Silas had cultivated had just exploded. He had found Lily, and now it seemed trouble had found them both. Silas knew he couldn't afford to confront Croft head-on with Lily so close. The man's presence was a clear threat, and his words confirmed Silas's fears. Lily's parents were not merely victims of a random act of violence, but part of a larger, more dangerous game. He needed to get Lily to safety, and he needed to do it without tipping his hand to Croft. "You're mistaken," Silas said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "No girl here, just me and my dog. Must be you're looking for someone else." Croft narrowed his eyes, his gaze sharp and suspicious. "I'm not mistaken, Kane. Jebediah is very clear. The girl is here, and I've been sent to retrieve her, so either you hand her over, or I'll have to make you." Before Silas could react, Buster, sensing the escalating tension, lunged forward with a fierce bark, snapping at Croft's boots. Croft stumbled back, his hand going for his own weapon. Silas seized the moment. "Buster, no!" he yelled, but the dog's protective instincts were in full force. Silas grabbed Lily's hand. "Run inside, Lily! Lock the door!" he commanded, shoving her towards the cabin. He turned to face Croft, drawing his Colt. "You want her? You'll have to go through me." Croft sneered, drawing his own pistol. "Gladly." The two men exchanged shots. Silas, though outnumbered and outgunned by the sudden appearance of Croft, was a seasoned frontiersman. He used the cover of his horse and the rough terrain to his advantage, ducking and weaving. Buster, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of fur and teeth nipping at Croft's heels, distracting him. In the exchange, Silas managed to wound Croft in the arm, causing him to drop his pistol. The stranger cursed, clutching his bleeding limb. Seeing his opportunity, Silas didn't press the attack. His priority was Lily. "Stay put, Lily!" he shouted again, then turned and mounted his horse, galloping away from the cabin, with Buster barking at his heels, drawing Croft's attention. He rode hard towards Harmony Creek, the unsettling encounter with Croft a stark reminder of the danger Lily was in. He needed help, and he needed it from people who understood the lawless undercurrents of the frontier. Harmony Creek was a typical frontier town, a main street lined with weathered wooden buildings, a saloon, a general store, a sheriff's office, and not much else. The dust swirled around Silas's horse as he rode in, drawing curious stares from the few people out and about. He dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, a small, squat building with a faded star on the door. Sheriff Brody was a portly man with a perpetually weary expression. He listened patiently as Silas recounted the story of Lily, her parents, and the menacing Jedediah Croft and his associate. "Jedediah, you say?" Brody mused, stroking his chin. "Name rings a bell. A drifter, mostly. Gets into trouble now and then. Scarred face, loud laugh, you say. Sounds like him. And the other one, mean eyes. Could be his partner, a man named Barlow. They're known to move around, working for whoever's paying." "They threatened me, Sheriff," Silas said, his voice low and serious. "Said they were sent to retrieve the girl. She's an orphan, her parents were taken. I don't know by whom, but these men seem to be their muscle." Brody sighed, leaning back in his chair. "This sounds like more than just a simple debt collection, Silas. There's folks out here who operate beyond the law, pulling strings from the shadows. If Croft and Barlow are working for them, it could get dangerous. Especially for that little girl." "That's why I came to you, Sheriff," Silas said. "I need to know who these people are, and I need to make sure Lily is safe. I brought her back to my ranch, but I can't keep her there if she's being hunted." Brody looked at Silas, a flicker of respect in his weary eyes. "You did right by bringing her in, Silas. Not many men would. As for who's behind it, we'll need to do some digging. But be warned, you're poking a hornet's nest." These aren't just common outlaws, they're connected. As Silas left the sheriff's office, a sense of grim determination settled over him. He had found Lily, and now he was embroiled in a dangerous game he didn't fully understand. But he wouldn't back down. He had a responsibility and a growing, unexpected feeling of protectiveness towards the terrified orphan. The whispers of trouble had become a roar, and Silas Kane was ready to face it. Silas returned to his ranch, the encounter with Croft and his subsequent conversation with Sheriff Brody weighing heavily on his mind. Lily, pale but unharmed, greeted him with a shy smile. Buster, sensing Silas's return, was ecstatic, his tail wagging furiously. Did you find out anything?" Lily asked, her voice small. Silas knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. "I spoke to the sheriff in Harmony Creek. He knows of the man you mentioned, Jebediah. Apparently, he's a rough sort, known to work for some unsavory characters. The man who threatened me was his associate named Barlow." Lily shivered, her earlier fear resurfacing. "Who are they working for?" "That's what the sheriff and I need to figure out," Silas said. He watched Lily closely. "Did your parents ever mention anyone they owed money to, or anyone they might have crossed?" Lily thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. Pa was a good man. He worked hard. But sometimes he'd get worried. He'd talk about the railroad, about how they were pushing everyone out. He said they were too powerful, too greedy. He refused to sell our land to them, even when they offered a lot of money. He said it was his land, his father's land. Silas's eyes widened. The railroad. That explained a lot. The railroad companies were notorious for their ruthless expansion, often using strong-arm tactics to acquire land. Jebediah and Barlow could easily be hired muscle, working for a land acquisition agent or a shady intermediary. His own parents had also refused to sell their land years ago before they passed. The memory, a long-buried ember, flared with a new intensity. "The railroad, huh?" Silas murmured. He remembered the whispers of land disputes, of families forced off their claims. It was a dark side of progress, built on coercion and fear. "And your father refused to sell?" "Yes," Lily confirmed, her voice firming with a flicker of her father's spirit. "He said he'd rather die than let them take it." Silas looked out at the vast expanse of his land, the land his family had worked for generations. He understood her father's defiance. He understood it all too well. This wasn't just about a debt. It was about ownership, about survival, about standing up to powerful forces that threatened to crush the independent spirit of the frontier. "Lily," Silas said, his voice resolute, "you are safe here, for now. But we can't stay put forever. If these men are working for the railroad, they won't stop. We need a plan." He looked at her small, earnest face, and a protective resolve hardened within him. The ghost of his own past, of his own losses, seemed to whisper encouragement. He wouldn't let Lily suffer the same fate. He owed it to her, and he owed it to the memory of his own family. "We need to find out more," Silas continued, "about who is orchestrating this. And then we need to make sure they know that the land you and your parents called home, and this land," he gestured around them, "is not theirs for the taking." A nascent understanding began to dawn between the gruff rancher and the orphaned girl. They were both in their own ways tied to this land, and both had suffered at the hands of unseen powerful forces. A shared destiny, forged in loss and defiance, was beginning to bind them together. Silas knew they couldn't remain on the ranch indefinitely. Jebediah and Barlow, or whoever they were working for, would likely return, and this time they might not be alone. Harmony Creek offered a semblance of law and order, but Silas suspected that the deeper powers at play might have influence even there. He needed to find a more permanent solution for Lily, and that meant uncovering the truth behind the railroad's aggressive land acquisition. "Lily," Silas said one morning as they watched the sun paint the eastern sky with hues of orange and pink, "I think we need to go somewhere for a while. Somewhere safe where we can figure this out." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Where are we going?" "I know a place," Silas said, a memory surfacing, a distant cousin who'd moved to a larger town further west, a place called Redemption Gulch. It was far from here, but it was a place where Lily might be able to find some semblance of normalcy and where Silas could make discreet inquiries without drawing unwanted attention. "It's a long ride, but it's safer than staying here while we're being hunted." He packed what they needed, supplies, a change of clothes for Lily, and of course his Colt and Buster's loyal presence. And they prepared to leave. Silas made sure to leave no trace of their departure, covering their tracks as best he could. The old barn, with its damning SOS, remained a silent sentinel of the past. The journey was arduous. They rode for days, crossing rolling plains, rocky outcrops and sparse scrubland. Silas kept a watchful eye, his senses heightened, always scanning the horizon. Lily, though weary, proved to be a resilient traveler, her initial fear gradually giving way to a quiet determination. She rode her own small pony, a sturdy, gentle mare Silas had acquired for her. Buster trotted tirelessly beside them, his vigilance unwavering. During their travels, Silas began to see a different side of Lily. She possessed a quiet strength, a keen observational skill, and an unexpected resilience. She would point out interesting rock formations, identify different birds, and ask thoughtful questions about the world around them. Silas found himself talking to her more, sharing stories of his life, of his family, of the land. He realized he was no longer just protecting her. He was beginning to care for her deeply. A bond forged in shared hardship and mutual vulnerability was solidifying. One evening, as they made camp under a sky ablaze with stars, Lily asked, "Silas, why did you help me?" Silas looked at the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "Because I saw myself in you, Lily, lost, alone, and because no one should have to face that kind of fear on their own." He hesitated, then added, "And because your message, it reminded me that even in the darkest places, there's always a flicker of hope, a call for help that deserves to be heard." Lily smiled, a genuine, heartwarming smile that lit up her face. She reached out and took his hand. It was small and soft, a stark contrast to his own calloused grip. "Thank you, Silas." As they continued their journey towards Redemption Gulch, the shadows of their past seemed to lessen, replaced by the dawning light of a shared future. The trail ahead was uncertain, fraught with the dangers they were fleeing, but for the first time in a long time, Silas Kane felt a flicker of something akin to hope, not just for himself, but for the young girl by his side. Redemption Gulch was a bustling town, a stark contrast to the quiet desolation of Silas's ranch. It was a hub for miners, prospectors, and those seeking new beginnings, a place where fortunes were made and lost, and where secrets could sometimes be unearthed amidst the clamor. Silas found them a modest boarding house run by a kindly widow named Martha, who took an immediate liking to Lily. "She's a sweet child," Martha said, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she watched Lily explore the small, clean room. "Seems she's been through a lot." "She has," Silas confirmed, his gaze lingering on Lily's small figure. "But she's strong." While Lily settled into the relative safety and warmth of Martha's boarding house, Silas began his discreet inquiries. He frequented the local saloon, the general store, and the livery stable, listening to the town's gossip and trying to glean any information about railroad operations, land disputes, or individuals who might be connected to Jebediah and Barlow. He learned that a prominent railroad company, the Western Star Railroad, was indeed pushing its tracks westward and had a reputation for aggressive tactics. Land agents, often rough men with little regard for the law, were frequently employed to secure rights of way. Silas also heard whispers of a particular agent, a man named Thorne, who was known for his ruthlessness and efficiency in clearing land. Thorne's name sent a prickle of unease down Silas's spine. He fit the profile of someone who would employ men like Jebediah and Barlow. One afternoon, while Silas was nursing a drink at the saloon, he overheard a hushed conversation between two prospectors. Heard Thorne's men are muscling folks near the old Miller claim, one said, threatening them, trying to buy them out cheap, especially the ones who refuse. The ones who refuse end up regretting it, the other replied grimly. Heard old man Miller's place got accidentally burned down last week. No witnesses, of course. Silas's blood ran cold. Burned down. It was a tactic he knew the railroad sometimes employed to force people off their land. He felt a surge of anger and protectiveness for Lily and her family. Her father had refused to sell, and now his property was likely destroyed, his family gone. He returned to the boarding house, his mind racing. He needed to find definitive proof that Thorne or his associates were responsible for the fate of Lily's parents. He couldn't just rely on whispers and circumstantial evidence. He needed something concrete to present to the authorities to ensure justice for Lily and her family. That evening, as Silas sat with Lily and Martha, a thought struck him. He remembered the rough nature of the scratches Lily had made on the barn wall. If Jebediah and Barlow were involved, perhaps they had left some trace, some evidence at the site of the original incident, before Lily was found. The abandoned homestead where her parents had lived, that was a place that might still hold clues. Lily, Silas said, his voice thoughtful, do you remember exactly where your parents' home was? Before they were taken? Lily nodded. Yes, it was a little ways past the old creek bed, near the cluster of cottonwood trees. A plan began to form in Silas's mind. It was risky, but it might be their only chance to uncover the truth and bring those responsible to justice. He would have to make a journey back to the place where it all began, to search for the missing pieces of the puzzle. Silas and Lily journeyed back to the charred remains of her family's cabin. While Lily watched, Silas and his dog, Buster, meticulously searched the ruins. After a thorough search, Buster uncovered a small metal strongbox buried near the foundation. Inside, they found a few scorched documents, including a deed to the land, and most importantly, a ledger detailing payments for clearing the Miller claim. Silas realized the entries, in a handwriting matching Jebediah's description, were proof that the railroad's agents had destroyed the homestead and likely killed Lily's parents. With the evidence in hand, Silas made a heartfelt promise to Lily. He would be her new family, a protector and a father. Back in Redemption Gulch, Silas presented the strongbox and ledger to Magistrate Thorne. The evidence was undeniable, and arrest warrants were issued for Jebediah and Barlow. Their testimony implicated the railroad agent Thorne, who was brought to justice. The Western Star Railroad was forced to compensate the families they had wronged. With the matter resolved, Silas purchased a new farmhouse on the outskirts of town, where he and Lily could build a new life. As he watched Lily play with Buster, her laughter filling the air, Silas felt a deep sense of peace. He had found not just an orphan to protect, but a daughter, and in their new family he found his own redemption. Their story, born from tragedy, was a testament to courage and hope.